Tales from the Americas. The Singing Flute, from Venezuela. There was once a king with 3 sons named Pedro, Juan, and Jose. It happened one time that the king's eyesight began to fail. Little by little he was becoming blind. The best doctors in the country came, but they could do nothing for him. At last one doctor told him, "There is a cure for this sickness. The remedy is a medicine distilled from the flower of the olive tree." When the king heard this, he was glad. But then he thought, "Wherever will I get the flower of this olive tree? For there are no olive trees in this country." In despair, he sent for his 3 sons and told them about the medicine which could be made if only an olive blossom could be found, and he asked them to help him. Then the oldest son, Pedro, said to his father, "I will go and look for an olive flower, but it will be expensive to go here and there. Give me my inheritance now, and I will begin the search." So the king gave Pedro his inheritance, and Pedro went out to find an olive tree. He traveled far, and on the road he met an old woman begging for charity. But Pedro was not of a generous nature, and he refused to give her anything. He continued his journey with a single purpose, to find an olive tree in blossom. The weeks and months went by. He found nothing. Anxious because his oldest son failed to return, the king called his second son, Juan, and asked him also to go out and seek an olive flower. Juan asked his father for half his inheritance, and went out searching. On the road he too met the old woman begging for alms. Like Pedro, he refused her and continued his way. He went here and there, scanning the landscape with his eyes, but he found no olive trees. More weeks passed. When the youngest son, Jose, saw what neither of his brothers returned, and that his father's eyes were getting worse every day, he went to the king and said, "Give me your blessing, father, and I will try to find the olive blossom which will restore your sight." The king gave Jose his blessing, and the young man began his journey. He traveled far, and on the road he too met the old woman who asked for charity. He was filled with compassion for her poverty, and he said, "I have no money to give you, but I will gladly share my food." He opened his knapsack and gave her half of what was in it. The 2 of them sat and ate together, and he told the old woman of his search. She said, "Wherever will anyone find olive trees in this country?" Jose nodded in agreement. When the woman had finished eating, she said, "I will tell you where there are olive trees. Many miles to the west is a mountain which rises up from the floor of the valley. High up on the east slope of this mountain is a grove of olive trees. There you will find your blossoms." They parted then, and Jose went westward until he came to the mountain that rose from the floor of the valley. And there on the eastern slope he found an olive grove in bloom. He joyfully picked some olive flowers, and quickly began his journey homeward. On the way he met his brothers, who had searched for the olive flower in vain. Rather than being glad that Jose had been successful, they were jealous of his accomplishment. They took the blossoms away from him, and when he protested, they beat him so hard that he fell on the ground quiet and motionless. Fearful of their wicked act being discovered, they buried Jose on the roadside and hurried home. The king rejoiced when Pedro and Juan returned with the olive blossoms. The king's sight was restored, and great honors were bestowed on the 2 sons. But the continued absence of Jose filled the king with anxiety and grief. On the spot where Juan and Pedro had buried their brother, a strange thing happened. Out of the earth which covered him, reeds began to sprout. One day, a shepherd was passing by, and he heard a sweet musical sound coming from the reeds. He approached closely and listened. He heard a young voice singing, "Shepherd, play upon me, and give me the power to tell the true story of the magic olive flower." So the shepherd cut one of the reeds and made a flute out of it. When he placed the flute to his mouth to play, the same sweet words and music came out again. The shepherd went around the countryside with his flute, and everywhere the people heard the song, "Play upon me, and give me the power to tell the true story of the olive flower." The fame of the flute spread far and wide. At last the king heard of the matter, and he sent for the shepherd so that he might hear this strange thing for himself. The shepherd came and stood before the king. He placed the flute to his lips and blew gently, and a young voice sang, "O father, play upon me, and give me the power to tell the true story of the magic olive flower." The king seized the flute from the shepherd's hands. He placed it to his lips and blew upon it, and he heard José's young voice telling the story of how the olive blossoms were found, and how his brothers had beaten him and buried him by the roadside. In grief and anguish, the king had Juan and Pedro thrown into prison, and he set out at once for the place where José was buried. His soldiers found the bay of reeds by the roadside, and they dug up the earth and found there the body of José. But the great miracle had not yet ended, for José was not dead, as his brothers had believed him to be. He stood up and embraced his father, and the king wept for joy. There are great celebrations at José's return, and as a thanks offering for the return of his sight and the youngest son, the king released Juan and Pedro from their imprisonment.